This episode is sponsored by The Alcohol Experiment, a free 30-day challenge designed to interrupt your patterns, give you control, restore your health, and put you back in touch with the version of you who doesn't need alcohol to cope, relax, or enjoy life. More than 220,000 people have already tried The Alcohol Experiment for themselves and have seen improved sleep, increased happiness, reduced anxiety, and so much more. Join thousands in this inspiring, hopeful, and exciting program where you examine your beliefs and reconnect with the best version of you without ever feeling like you're missing out. Start today for free at alcoholexperiment.com. Hi, this is Annie Grace, and welcome to this Naked Mind podcast. I am here with Ryan Stock. Hi, Ryan.
Hey, yeah, you too. Good to catch up.
Yeah, it's awesome. So why don't you sort of take us back to the beginning? Where did it all start for you?
Yeah, well, as you know, you and I have worked together on a couple projects before the pod, but I think for me, the way that I'll reframe this a little bit is I'll talk about a couple of the revelatory moments for me, so to speak, leading up to reframing my relationship with alcohol. And if it's cool with you, we'll dive into the process afterwards as well. Does that sound good?
Yeah, that sounds awesome.
Okay, cool. So as I mentioned, the first time I think I really realized I needed to reframe my relationship, or that something was broken, was around the time I was 34. It was actually my 34th birthday. I was coaching college basketball at the time in an intense industry like you were in, one that celebrated the highs and the lows. So drank when you won, drank when you lost, drinking to celebrate or drain away your sorrows, as they say. But on my 34th birthday, we won the game. I was coaching by double digits. It was my birthday, and I found out I was going to be a father. So all what should have been super positive experiences for anyone, but especially for me in my life. And I found myself drinking by myself in the kitchen at midnight. And so while I didn't know it at the time, that was the first time where I was like, something needs to change, but I don't know what. So I thought at that time it was my profession. And then I just needed to reframe what I was doing, who I was working for, whatever the case may be. So fast forward a couple of years, that was very clearly not it. I got out of coaching. I started to dive into the entrepreneurial world, studied behavior assessments, learning more about the mind, why we do the things we do. I did a year-long intensive practice program in and around meditation, yoga. So I was doing all these super deep spiritual things to try and get more clarity on what was the lack of self-love or what I was feeling, but nothing was working. I was doing all this reflective work, a deep dive, and nothing was really changing, but I still hadn't realized it at the time. So fast forward a couple of years, as I mentioned, to right around where I start the book that you and I connected on, called One Last Drop. And this was about 2 years before I decided to reframe my relationship with alcohol. So I think in the book it's 680 days before. But my son's mom and I are going through a nasty divorce now. And my routine was I would drop him off with her around 4 p.m. And then I'd usually go watch football on Sunday, have some beers, and we'd go pass out on my couch, or get a couple beers and then just call it a night. But I don't blame my son's mom at all. We have a good relationship now. It was super intense this weekend, and she was trying to get a reaction out of me, had asked me if I ever thought about killing myself to make it easier on her and my son. I know she didn't mean it. She was just saying something to get a reaction. Unfortunately, that was where our relationship was at the time. But regardless, it was still super painful, super intense for me. So this night I got good and drunk. Thought I could drive, obviously could not. And on my drive home, clipped a curb. Luckily, by the grace of God or whoever, I made my way to a gas station. It was about 500 feet away. Another 500 feet from there was a hotel. So I made it through, and no one really knew the difference except for me. And what should have been a gigantic warning sign, I plowed right through. So fast forward a couple more years. Now we're like 180 days out. And this is all before the book technically starts. I'm doing a yoga workshop with my new partner. things haven't really changed. I actually drank less in the end than I did back in my coaching and playing days as an athlete.
Did you drink, like, how was your relationship with alcohol growing up?
Yeah, so I've listened to some of your other pods, and this is what I think's interesting about alcohol in general is I would I would characterize it as normal, but what I've learned since then is our definitions of normal, what I might perceive as normal, could be extreme for someone else or not much. What I do know I did unconsciously was I always surrounded myself by people that drank heavily, and that started in college. Like my roommates and I, we always partied really heavily. Like if we didn't drink the night before a game, we definitely drink in excess after the game. And that went all the way from the time I was in my 20s, like I said, quite literally through my early 30s when I was coaching and I was still drinking really heavily. So when I say drinking heavily, I mean 8, 10, 12 drinks in the night, shots, all that stuff, multiple times a week usually. And yeah, that carried me all the way through until up to like this 180-day mark. Does that answer your question?
Sure.
Pretty intensely, I think most people would say. But it wasn't like, especially in college or as a coach, I didn't think I was drinking to like not feel. I think I did have a battle with perfectionism that happens, I think, in both of our industries where nothing was ever good enough. You know, part of the challenge I had as an athlete and as a coach was if you lost, that wasn't good enough. You wanted to win. If you won by 2, you thought you should have won by double digits. If you won by double digits, it was on to the next game. So the irony in that was you're never present. You know, and now that I'm into mindfulness yoga, I understand the importance of being in the moment, you know, especially without alcohol and the beauty of that. But at the time, I was never wanting to feel, and nothing was ever good enough. And so alcohol was the answer to that. You know, I was drinking most nights, if not every night, and not wanting to feel, and never wanting to process emotions, not wanting to be present. And that happened all the way through until, with your help, I reframed my relationship with alcohol.
Awesome.
But back to that 180 days before. So I was doing a yoga workshop with my now partner. So this is right when COVID was starting. Her and I had a pretty volatile relationship, full of highs and lows, like a lot of relationships that center around a high dependency in and around alcohol. And this night was going well, but I'd been off for a couple of weeks, physically more than anything, not feeling very energetic, not wanting to eat. As a result, I was drinking more energy drinks. I'd had food poisoning a couple of weeks before this, so I'd thrown up quite a bit that night. And yeah, just fell off. I've always had a pretty good connection and intuition with my body. But for whatever reason, on this night in particular, something felt broken. So she eats a regular meal. I barely touch my food, but I'm drinking still this night. And we go home. I wake up in the middle of the night. I'm sorry if this is a little graphic, but I threw up 100% blood at like 2, 3 in the morning.
Oh, wow. Yikes.
Go back to sleep, ignore it. Like it's just going to go away or something. A few hours roll by and I throw up blood again. But I'm supposed to have my son in the morning. So I'm trying to play it off, tough it out, do all those macho silly things. And so, yeah, he gets there in the morning. And this is one of the really powerful moments for me and what should have been, you know, the final straw, but still was not for me. And I'll never forget it. So my partner had to go teach yoga. I'm with my son watching a kid's movie in the morning, and I can tell I'm going to throw up again. And I know it's going to be blood. So I go into the bathroom. My son's like 3 at the time. And yeah, I'm throwing up 100% blood again. And he walks in and sees, and he can see that I'm throwing up blood. And he's like, "What's wrong, Daddy?" And I'm trying to act like nothing's wrong. But this is a super intense, heavy moment. I don't know what's wrong. I can tell it's something really serious. And, you know, here's my child like trying to pat me on the back, take care of me. And that was, yeah, super intense, super powerful, but it still wasn't enough. And I share that story because I know for a lot of people, they really struggle with that pull of alcohol and wanting to step away, but not being able to. And this is the moment where I stepped away from alcohol for a few months, but I went right back into it, and what should have been a really aha moment for me, like stop. Um, a couple more months went by, and with COVID, and then the fact that my partner at the time, her and I lost a child. She was like 6 weeks into her pregnancy.
Oh, wow.
Went through a lot of super intense emotions that kind of triggered it back, and started the drinking right back up again. And it wasn't until a few months after that that she finally gave me the ultimatum that, yeah, something has to change. I don't want to be in this relationship anymore with alcohol in your life. So until you're done with alcohol, I'm done with the relationship. So that moment was the moment where I decided to stop drinking. And that's what also started the book that you and I have referenced, where I wrote One Last Drop. And that came across because I no longer had an outlet to release all these super intense emotions, which was alcohol for me. And I shouldn't say an outlet, a numbing agent would be a better way of putting it. But now that I'm feeling all these super intense emotions, my release was writing. And I was writing like 2,000 words a day, 10 pages essentially, of just thoughts, feelings, emotions that I was pouring out. And these letters ended up being letters to my son over the course of the first 30 days of just what I was thinking, feeling, healing. And I tie those letters into what I've since realized were the three imbalances in my life, which was alcohol, athletics, and love. So I write a letter to my son each day. I tie it into an athletic memory. I weave in stories of the relationships and the imbalances that occurred with all three. And yeah, that book's then since been turned into a documentary that's doing real well. It's on the film festival circuit. But yeah, it wasn't until that day one, and then the writing of the book and the collecting of all the thoughts, that I reframed my relationship with alcohol, and have since found so much beauty and depth in my life that I didn't know existed, because for years and years I was just numbing it out with alcohol, and had all these unconscious beliefs that weren't real, but that you feel super intensely at the time. And all the things that I know you reference on this podcast all the time, that everything from it makes sexual experiences better, to it makes you more confident, makes you more funny, all the things you sincerely believe at the time, but that in actuality aren't true. And it wasn't until probably weeks later that I was able to see, feel, and experience that clarity at a level that I had never felt before.
That's awesome. So, in those early days, what sort of things are really helpful for you?
Well, one of the powerful moments of the book, and what was the most helpful experience for me, that again I'll share with your listeners, was around day 4, which to me was when I truly kind of bottomed out, honestly. So I'd been away from alcohol for a few days, went and saw a therapist for the first time, and was brutally honest about my relationship with alcohol, the relationship I had with my partner, a lot of these imbalances I had going on with my life. And I'm like sobbing through, half the session. And at the end, she wraps it up by saying, well, most imbalances, whether it's alcohol or another drug or whatever it is, social media, sexual addictions, it all stems around a lack of self-love. So it's going to start there for you. Can you do that? Can you start with self-love? And I looked her straight in the eyes and I said, no, I can't love myself. I don't think I deserve love. And it's not very often that you see a therapist, jaw drop or see their breath taken away. But I could tell she was like, what do you mean? I was like, I don't think I deserve love. I've been a terrible partner. I haven't been successful professionally because of the hold that I feel like alcohol has had on me. I haven't been the parent that I feel like I should have been. I never let it affect my son. I didn't drink around my son, at least in excess. But as I've since learned, I was definitely having highs and lows, coming up and coming down from alcohol around him. So when she asked me that, I was like, no, I don't love myself. I don't think I deserve love. But what I'll share with your listeners, and what really helped me, is in the beginning, that love may need to come from someone else, like it came from my son. I had some really strong friends in my life. My partner and I ended up getting back together for a time, people that made me feel loved and that I was worthy of love. And with their support, I found that self-love again. And then I started to realize I also had to shift my focus on, because what I've also since learned is what we focus on tends to intensify. And for me, I was focusing on all the negatives, all these failures in my life, or what I couldn't be because of alcohol, or the failures that I was going through professionally, the relationship I had with athletics. And I was intensifying those emotions, those thoughts, all the negative spaces in my life.
Yeah.
And if you're able to shift that and you can turn the focus to the positives, gratitude, love, self-love, that will intensify too. But when you're in the moment, especially when you're first stepping away from it or reframing it, whatever that relationship looks like for alcohol for you right now, whatever you focus on is going to intensify, positive or negative. And so for me, it started with self-love and reframing my relationship with myself. And then once I did that and had that gratitude, love, that positive frame of mind, things started to lighten up and get more enjoyable in every area of my life.
That's awesome. Yeah, that's such an important aspect of it. I mean, if you don't have that, then it's hard to build a foundation of a life you don't really want to escape from, right? So
Absolutely. And the other thing I've learned that in your book was so helpful for was that the conscious unconscious mind, and we perceive alcohol to be such an important part. At least I did. I shouldn't say we all, but from like social media to movies to music, alcohol is framed in this way where, to me, it felt so heavy and so important. Everything that I did, that my unconscious mind was telling me that I couldn't do any of these things without it too. And it can grab hold of you and be so powerful. That's something that I really appreciated about you, This Naked Mind, your awareness and your reframing of that, which is you can enjoy all these things and it'll actually be even better for you when you take it away. But we're kind of pounded over the head, like I said, most of the time unconsciously through all these different platforms. That I really appreciated that about you and all the work you've done to be able to reframe, step out, and understand that that's not, in fact, how the world exists, and there is beauty and depth in all these other areas too.
yeah, it's so funny because like we weren't born to drink alcohol.
Yeah. Well, even our first experiences, and that's again something you allude to in your book, like it tastes gross the first times you drink it. And I remember you talked about my early relationship. I remember the first few times I drank it, I was like, man, this is terrible, but everyone's doing it, so I guess I should keep doing it. And then eventually it stops tasting terrible. But yeah, it's nothing about the experience. And that's what I think's so bizarre and so unique about society as a whole. But it's going to take, speaking of conscious, unconscious, is going to take such a conscious awareness of so many people to reframe that relationship. And the work like you and I are doing, where we're trying to bring to light all these negative effects that it has on you physically, mentally, emotionally. But until people are more confident to have those conversations and that they can exist in that space without it, it is going to be difficult conversations and experiences to have. And I say that judgment free, like for people that are still drinking or it's still a part of their lives, do your thing. Like I said, I say that without judgment. But it is interesting that so much of it in the relationship in and around alcohol, at least for me, it's really negative. But as a society and the way it's highlighted and reframed, it's shown to be a positive, when in actuality it has very few, if any, positives to it.
Yeah, for sure. That's really true. So from that moment of just sort of backing up to your story again, you had that moment of the blood, and then it was like, did you decide I'm just going to do 30 days, or how did that process work for you?
That was another interesting experience, because I remember laying in the hospital bed in intensive care, and I lost half the blood in my body. Speaking of movies, from that moment on, I used to always be in disbelief when I would see people get shot or stabbed in movies and lose all this blood. And I was like, that's not realistic. There's no way they could survive. And then I went through intensive care and lost half the blood in my body. I was like, oh, maybe it's not that unrealistic. But I share that because I remember the doctor, and I was like, man, I hope he tells me to stop drinking. Like I was in the hospital hoping that someone would tell me to stop, or that I had to stop. and that I would die. And that sounds so bizarre, but when you're, in the darkest spaces, that's how your mind gets warped and how you think. And I was hoping that he would come back and say that these tests were showing that I was drinking too much and that like my liver was in bad shape or something that was going to give me an out to have to stop. But he didn't. He said that it was a random combination of events. As I mentioned, I'd had food poisoning a couple of weeks before and thrown up. I was drinking a bunch of energy drinks because I wasn't eating. So that was also causing the lining in my throat to soften. So he said, we would recommend you don't drink at least for a couple months. And, from that point, it's going to be up to you. Your tests are all coming back positive. And I was like, man, I wish he would have just told me to stop. So timeline wise, in answer to your question, they just suggested I take at least a couple months off. And then I don't even remember what triggered it. I think it was another relationship thing with the partner and I going through a difficult stretch where, it started with, okay, I'm going to have a beer and a shot tonight. And then it slowly picked back up from there. But that was the other interesting piece of it that I referenced a little bit in the book was like number wise in the end, I drank less, but I was drinking not to feel. I was drinking earlier in the morning. Like there were some days where I'd feel really sad or upset. I'd drop my son off at school and know that I was not going to have him again for a few days. And I'd go get a beer at like 10 or 11 in the morning. And I was clearly using it now to just not have to think and feel, as opposed to earlier, I was waiting till the night. Not that it was any better or any worse, but earlier in my life, I was drinking for celebratory reasons or at the end of the night to just have, binge amounts of drinks. I was drinking less at the end, but very much using it to not think, not feel. And then after a couple months, it just started back up again.
And then what happened?
Once my partner and I went through those waves, and then she gave me that ultimatum, which again I appreciate now in hindsight. And then the book started, and I think it was around day 11, day 12, her and I got back together, and I started to have all these experiences and feel the positives of my life without alcohol in it. All those things that we think makes feel better, once it was removed, I actually realized we're a lot better without it. So like the sexual experiences, conversations, rebuilding my confidence in myself, that slowly started to get better. And it was actually right around day 30 that one of the things I'm most proud of revolved around a tragedy. I had a former player that got shot and killed at his son's football game. And he was one of the only players. I coached junior college basketball, and then I coached at a 4-year school, and I coached him at both. So he was the only player I had that I coached both junior college and the 4-year.
Wow.
So him and I had a really, intense, intimate relationship, and he had 4 kids, all under the age of like 10 or 11. He was engaged to his kid's mother, had all these really positive things going in his life, and got shot and killed by his child's mother's other baby dad over some stuff that in my eyes seems totally irrational. But the point of the story is, when I found all this out, because I was sober and not just throwing myself into a bottle or getting drunk not to feel, I wrote a long heartfelt post in remembrance of this player. His name's Marky Nolan, and the post went viral. It got over 600 comments, had hundreds of shares, and we raised like $7,000 for his family to pay for all the funeral expenses and give the mom some money to bridge the gap of what her new existence was going to be with all these kids. And that wouldn't have happened if I wouldn't have reframed my relationship with alcohol like I had. So that was right around day 30. And then the way the book and the documentary end is on the 90th day. I'm actually attending his funeral, which was filled with all sorts of emotions because I was driving down all these highways in Kansas, thinking about coaching, my relationship with him, and how often alcohol was woven into those experiences, and now it's been removed. And since then I've written a couple books, like I mentioned, the documentary that you're a part of, and I'm so grateful for. But none of these things would have happened if I wouldn't have been able to reframe my relationship with alcohol, which again is a huge part to you. It was your book on day 4 too that really flipped the switch for me. And you and I talked a little bit about this too. It was always difficult for me with some of the other programs to not think that I was in control and to not understand why I was thinking and feeling the way I was doing. But because of you and your book and the reframing of all that, once I was understanding my unconscious mind, why I was having these thoughts, beliefs, feelings, I was able to reframe all of that. And I'm still a work in progress, like we all are. But now I see, feel, experience life in a totally different way, in a more beautiful way, and I'm grateful for that.
Yeah, that's so awesome. So what have been some of the things that have been most difficult about not drinking?
Yeah, great question. And that one's actually pretty easy for me, from my perspective. I think the beauty of stepping away from alcohol is you feel things more intensely. The difficult part is you feel things more intensely. So all those negative emotions, all those negative thoughts, you have to sit with and you have to process, right? You have to breathe through, you have to feel through. And luckily I have meditation and yoga to help me with that. But especially early on when you're learning, and I know you and I, we reference our children a ton, but like difficult conversations or a frustrating day with a kid, something that happens at work, or something in your relationship, it's much harder to move through those experiences and those emotions without some type of numbing agent. It's also much, much more rewarding. So that's kind of the paradox in the reframed relationship around drugs in general, but especially with alcohol, is life's so much more rewarding, so much more deeper, more beautiful, but it's also challenging because you are going to feel these things in a way that you've never felt before. So until you're able to breathe through those things and give yourself some tools in a healthy way to reframe those emotions, those thoughts, especially the negative ones, it can be challenging. That's why most people, in my opinion, that's why most people don't do it. It is way harder to feel, to think, and to move through negative emotions. But if you're able to do it, then you experience all those positive ones, and you manage all those negative ones in a such more beneficial way. But it's really challenging to do that.
Yeah, that's so true. I for sure feel the same way. It's been like all the really good growth happens on the other side of feeling those emotions, but it's hard to get used to, living just everything feels so much. It feels real for the first time.
It's much easier to kick the can down the road, so to speak, of just having alcohol and be like, I'll just feel this or deal with this tomorrow. But then as you and I, tomorrow becomes the next day and the next day and the next day, and then you find yourself never really having to process or deal with any of the emotions. So yeah, absolutely, it's more challenging but more rewarding.
Very cool. Well, is there any other sort of things you want to share about your journey?
I think the biggest things for me, it starts with love, self-love in particular. So wherever you're at in your journey, understand that you're worthy of love. That was the biggest challenge for me. A lot of times we can be so judgmental and critical of ourselves, the perfectionist in me, the competitor in me. Nothing was ever good enough. It wasn't until I had a mentor reframe that perspective to me. He said, okay, well, close your eyes for a minute and envision everything's perfect. What would you think? What would you feel then? And so I closed my eyes for a second. I was like, yeah, I would probably move right on to the next thing, or that would still not be good enough, And once it's like those simple yet profound moments like that, where I realized, quit being so hard on yourself. You deserve love. Be grateful for what you have going on in your life, even the difficult times. So that's the biggest one. And then the other one that I mentioned with the conscious, unconscious mind, to me, understand that from a society standpoint, I know it can feel and seem daunting to reframe a lot of these unconscious or perceived beliefs, especially in society. Um, but it's also way more rewarding if you're able to navigate that in a healthy space. So to me, that was like the two biggest teaching points or takeaways for me in my growth and journey so far is the foundational piece of self-love, loving yourself, the good and the bad, and then understanding that reframed and difficult transition of a lot of these unconscious beliefs from your social life to like the sexual experiences to confidence. It's challenging, but it's infinitely more rewarding if you can get through it and keep your head down. Or if you slip up and have a mistake, give yourself that love and start again. That's okay too. We've all been there as well.
Yeah, I think that's so important to be able to, just learn from things, and they're all just, call them data points, just places rather than places of beating yourself up. That's just awesome.
That's one of the things I love most about your overall message and how you teach us too, is even something like a data point, like the way you frame that is so forgiving, and not in a bad way, obviously in a super positive way, but like calling it a data point instead of a failure, or like, and I see people on their platforms all the time on social media, like I drank today, I'm such a failure. And then everybody comes flooding in. You're not a failure. It's a data point, like learn from it, or look how long you went before you drank. There's so many positive ways we can reframe our experiences or our data points as you put it. Yeah, that's one of the things I love and appreciate about you and your message is it's just that, man, we're all learning, we're all growing, we're all imperfect. And it's this path that we're on in life that's teaching us, that's one that allows us to have and feel this beauty, this depth, but not be judgmental as we're doing that. And I love that about you. I love that about your message. And even what you said just there, that brings a smile to my face. I appreciate that.
Awesome. Well, Ryan, let me ask you 2 questions to finish us off. First is, you gave me the great honor of inviting me, I guess, was it a year ago?
Yeah, just about.
A year ago, to take part in your documentary, where you had this beautiful vision of creating just a documentary about this journey that was really unique and really different. And it was so much fun. And so we got to meet each other live and film for the day, and it was just amazing. And now that documentary has gone on to win all sorts of awards, and it's really gaining, so much traction and helping so many people. So where can people find out more about that endeavor?
Yeah, so the book that the documentary is based off of is called One Last Drop. The documentary is called the same name. So the website's onelastdropdoc.com. And yeah, you were incredible on it. They can go visit that website, and we'll have links. I'm sure I've seen you put them at the bottom of each of these spots. We'll have links up there too. But yeah, it's been on the film festival circuit. That's been an incredible experience. You were phenomenal in it. And we tie in all 3 of those data points too: athletics, alcohol, and love. So there's pieces in there for everybody. You don't have to be solely struggling with alcohol or relationships or athletics. There's something in there for everyone. But yeah, thank you for talking about that. That's been an incredible experience. As we talked about a little bit before the pod, it's just in another film festival here in Kansas City that I'm really proud of. But yeah, that experience has been incredible. You were phenomenal in it. Your presence radiates off the screen. One of the other things I love about you is you can talk about these really high level educational points, but you break them down in a way that's so digestible, I think, for the masses that really comes off in the screen too. So we'll have more information about how your listeners can view that in the next weeks and months. Ideally, it'll get on a streaming platform. So once that happens, we'll let everyone know where they can watch it. But for now, just follow along onelastdropdoc.com, and we'll keep them posted from there.
That's so cool. I love it. It's so much fun, such important and powerful work. So let me ask you then the question that I always ask at the end of these things. If you were going to go back to Ryan, who was throwing up blood and his 3-year-old was trying to make him feel better, and you're going to talk to him about, encourage him or give him some wisdom from this future self, what would you say?
Yeah, I love how you end all of these pods with that. And my response to that would be, for me, that it starts with self-love and understanding that all these things that have happened to us, for some it's high levels of trauma, or in our case, like I had athletics, you had, high level sales and marketing. We all have our lives, we all have our stories, and we can be so hard on ourselves, so critical of ourselves. And as I mentioned, one of the things I appreciate about you and the way you write and speak is that foundation of love, of self-love. And so for me, if I was talking to me, I was always great at faking it. Like I could lead a yoga class and talk to my class about how they should love themselves and, be gentle with themselves. And I was always talking about it, but I never felt it. And so I would tell myself to practice what I preach and give myself that love and really focus on, like I said, what you focus on intensifies. So focus on all these positive things you have in your life, the loving relationship you have with your son, all these positive people you have in your life, and start to grow that and build off of that. Because the reality is, no matter what's happened in our lives, no matter where we're at, no matter what your current data point is, you do deserve love. You enjoy, or you deserve to enjoy, all these incredible experiences that we have in life. And I talk about imbalances a lot and how our ship can kind of feel like it's off, but it's going to balance itself again, and it may not feel like it in the moment, and it may feel super intense, super heavy. You may not feel like you deserve that love, that happiness, but you do. So I would tell myself that, I know you're in it right now. I know it feels heavy. I know it feels intense, and you feel like all these things have gone wrong, but you've got a lot to be grateful for in your life. And so focus on that gratitude, focus on that love, on that self-love. And once you start there, then it's going to start to grow and grow, intensify and intensify. And then now all of a sudden, 2 years later, we're right here. I'm talking to you. I've got an amazing son that's now 5 and lights up the room when he walks in it. I've got the book, the documentary, all this amazing traction. And if you were to ask me where I thought I'd be 2 years ago, I would have never thought that was possible. But it all starts with love and self-love.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that so much. That's so cool. Just, I guess, one more question, because I know that when people hear this, sometimes they say, well, how? I mean, like you said, I don't actually love myself. I actually hate myself right now. Like, how do you even take the first step?
Yeah. And that's where, great question, because for me, I didn't think I deserved it. And if you don't feel that right now, and the therapist was like, well, you got to tell yourself. And I was like, that's stupid. You can't do that if you don't feel it. And especially people that feel intensely like you're going to, if you're removing or reshaping your relationship with alcohol, you're going to feel things more intensely. And that includes the negative. And if that's the case for you, I guarantee you there's people out there in your life, it may not feel like it right now, but there are people in your life that do feel those things about you, that feel like, you're a great person, or that you do these things positive, because the reality is we all have them. So if you don't feel it right now, then reach out to some of those people that do, a mom, a dad, sisters, brothers, your kids, because somebody's feeling all those positive thoughts and emotions about you right now. And if you can't feel it, then start with them, and it'll slowly start to grow. It'll slowly start to radiate until, it was, as I mentioned, it was a week or so before I felt anything like that in my life. And I had to really lean on those people, especially my son. I'll never forget, there was a day I was watching a movie with him. I'm like crying, this is day 3 or 4. I'm crying watching a movie at like 3 p.m. because I'm just this emotional wreck. And I don't, I'm feeling all these negative thoughts, and he's not even paying attention. And this is the beauty of kids. He just puts his hand on my hand, and it's like everything just stopped. It's like one of those moments you see in a movie where everything just freezes. And I was like, man, this dude loves me. I could be doing all these terrible things, and no matter what, this kid's going to be there supporting me, loving me. So find those people in your life and surround yourself with them until it starts to be real, until it starts to radiate, and then take those baby steps and grow it out from there, focus it out from there.
That's awesome. That's so good. And I think the other thing that, I'll add to that is, sometimes I think about this idea of, just really asking, like, well, who are we to sort of decide that we're not worthy. And like something someone said to me once was so profound. And no matter what you believe sort of spiritually, the truth is you didn't create yourself, right? Like you didn't go and it's not like a painting that you painted or a building that you built or a piece of art that you created. And so I can understand if you're going to say, okay, this is a piece of art, I created it, I could have done so much better, right? But actually you were created. And so you are called to just be a steward and care for. And if you frame it like that, then, you can move from all these airy fairy feelings of, gosh, I have to love myself, because what we've done, I believe, as a society, as we've taken what we do and we've confused it with who we are. And especially when it comes to alcohol, we've literally taken our entire worthiness and we've narrowed it down to, did I drink today or did I not? And so everything that makes you a human being, you've narrowed it down to one thing, one tiny thing, one tiny behavior. And so you've confused who you are and that you're worthy as a human being that was created with consciousness and a brain and a body and all that stuff with your behavior. And those two things are not actually the same. They have to be separated in order for you to have some self-love. And what you said earlier, that great exercise that one of your mentors gave you of, well, what if it was all perfect? And that's the same question. Like, fast forward into the future, imagine that you do yoga 10 times a day and you've written 10 best-selling books and you're a billionaire and you've got the perfect marriage. And like at that moment, if you don't know that you're worthy because you exist, you're not going to know it then either. Right?
Yeah, such a great point. And you're right. So much of life is about perspective. And even like you're just talking about with works of art, that's something that's really helped me reframe that too. Someone can look at the most beautiful, what I would perceive as the most beautiful thing, and they're like, oh, that coloring's a little off. And so much of life becomes about perspective too, because you're exactly right. And that's where I've learned a lesson, that perfection, imperfection piece is where we're at in our lives where I might perceive is I'm really struggling right now might be incredible gains for someone else, or vice versa. I might be like, man, I wish I could meditate for 10 minutes like that person does. And they're being, critical as hell on themselves because they want to meditate for 60 minutes. So much of life is about perspective too. And I'm glad you said that. And the other thing you reminded me of is having an abundance mindset. This was one of the things that really helped me when I was stopping drinking, reframing my relationship with alcohol, was instead of being hyper focused on, I can't have alcohol, I reframed that to, I can have anything else in the world I want, like Starburst, Sprite, hot tamale, like all these crazy games, ice cream, steak. Like, what do you want right now that can help you? And that's just an abundance mindset versus a scarcity mindset of all I can have right now is alcohol, or I want to focus on is alcohol. Or in your case, what you just alluded to is I drank today. Well, maybe you went 3 days without drinking, or maybe a week, or maybe a month. And so, yeah, that's another beautiful way of reframing it, is having that abundance mindset versus scarcity mindset. Like, what are you focused on? Is it the fact that you only went 2 days instead of wanting to go a week? What are you focused on? And I think if we can reframe to that abundance, positive mindset instead of scarcity, whether it's, with alcohol or how long we go without it. I'm so glad you brought those up, because both of those are amazing, about perspective and then abundance mindset versus scarcity. Yeah. Love that.
Well, this has been so much fun, Ryan. Such an honor to have you on, and of course to be in your film and all of the things. So I'm
well, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm honored to be on the pod, and so glad that you agreed to help us with the documentary. Like I said, your presence radiates on the screen. So thank you so much for having me on and being a part of the doc both.
Awesome. Did you miss this Naked Mind Live? Do you maybe have a little bit of FOMO? But don't worry, I've got you covered. In fact, I had the entire event professionally recorded, and it's available digitally. Transformation in your living room. Yep, that is what it's all about. You can grab your digital ticket at thisnakedmind.com/digital ticket. And as always, rate, review, and subscribe to this podcast, as it truly helps the message reach somebody who might need to hear it today.